Amidst the mysterious mist, a white horse appears on the surface of the lake, with the figure of an injured man being dragged behind it in the cold wind. The photo Lily captured is not just a strange image. It is the key to unlocking painful secrets of the past. Will she have the courage to face the truth? And as the hoofprints reappear every morning, how will the past and present connect? Join us to uncover this story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to catch more thrilling and emotional episodes coming soon. This story begins on a dark night when Lily accidentally uncovers secrets buried beneath the lake. The hoofprints and blurry photos lead her on an irreversible journey where the past and present intertwine. Lily sat at her small cluttered desk, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across the room. It was the first time in months that she allowed herself to settle to breathe without the weight of the city looming over her. Her fingers traced the edges of a worn photograph of her parents. A snapshot from another life, one she could never return to. She had come to this remote part of Alberta seeking solitude, seeking the peace that could only be found in the stillness of nature. The city had swallowed her whole with its noise, and its faces, its constant barrage of memories she couldn't escape. The trauma had crushed her spirit, and the only remedy she could find was in the quiet of the wilderness. The promise of peace away from the chaos, a photographer by trade. Lily's eyes had always seen the world differently. Through the lens, she could capture moments, freeze time, make sense of the world around her, a world that never made sense to her heart. But now, with the camera resting at her side, Lily found herself confronting a new type of stillness, one that echoed deeper than the quietest moments she had ever known. It was in the air here, hanging over the lake, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The lake had always been there, its surface as flat and smooth as glass, like a mirror to the sky. Locals told stories about it, whispered legends of how the water was sacred, a place where spirits lingered, a place where things lost were found again. The Métis people spoke of it reverently, calling it the Mirror Lake, believing it to be the reflection of souls who had yet to find their rest. Lily, however, was not one to believe in such things. She came here seeking solace, not stories. But the lake, it was impossible not to be drawn to it. Every day she found herself standing at the water's edge, staring out at the endless expanse of stillness. The reflection of the sky, the trees, the distant mountains, all perfectly mirrored, as if the lake were some kind of portal, a boundary between the living and the dead. And there were moments, just moments, when the air would shift and the world would seem to hold its breath. The stillness would become unnerving heavy, with something unsaid. Lily couldn't explain it, but she felt it. A part of her, the part that still longed for connection, hoped for an answer in the lake. But the other part, the part that buried its grief and kept the world at arm's length, dismissed the thought as foolish. She had no interest in chasing ghosts or unraveling old stories that had no bearing on her life. She was here to heal, to rebuild what had been shattered. Yet as the days passed, the lake began to feel like something more than just water. It became a mirror, not just to the landscape, but to her soul. There were mornings when the fog would hang low over the surface, and for a split second Lily would swear she saw something moving beneath the surface. A ripple that didn't belong, a shape too fluid to be real. Her mind would race trying to make sense of it, but it was always just a fleeting image, nothing more. The lake's silent call gnawed at her, pulling her deeper, drawing her toward a mystery that felt impossible to ignore. Each day she returned to it, standing on the shore, camera in hand, but never capturing anything. The lens was always empty, the image always blank. She wasn't sure if it was the water or her own mind playing tricks on her, but the longer she watched, the more the sense of someone lurking just beneath the surface grew. The wind would howl at night, rattling the windows of her small cabin. But during the day, the lake remained eerily calm, as if it were waiting for her to understand something. Every time she tried to capture the reflection of the landscape, her photos came out perfectly still. Too perfect, as though the world itself had been paused. The tension between what her eyes saw and what the camera captured was unsettling. She found herself returning to the lake each day, obsessively trying to make sense of it. But the lake's surface always held its secrets. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in muted shades of purple and orange, Lily stood at the water's edge once again. She hadn't planned on taking another photo. The camera, heavy in her hands, felt like a burden, a reminder of a world she was trying to escape. But something about the evening felt different, like the air had thickened, becoming charged with an energy she couldn't describe. As she raised the camera, she saw it. A shape. A figure. At first it was nothing more than a faint distortion in the reflection. But as she focused the lens, the image sharpened. A white horse, its body glowing with an ethereal light, moved across the surface of the water. Its mane flowed like a ribbon in the wind, its hooves stirring the water in slow, deliberate steps. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The horse's reflection was perfect, too perfect, and it moved with a grace that seemed impossible. There was a moment when she thought she might be witnessing something truly magical, a moment of beauty in the midst of her sorrow. But then the reflection changed. A figure appeared beside the horse, a man. He was barely visible at first, his body faint, almost transparent. But as the horse galloped across the water, the man's outline grew clearer. He was dragging something, his body bent at an odd angle, as though he were being pulled against his will. His face, though obscured by shadows, seemed familiar. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. The photo was perfectly clear. But when she checked the screen, there was nothing there, only the stillness of the lake. She could hardly believe her own eyes. Had she seen it? Had she imagined it? The reflection of the horse was gone now, as if it had never been there at all. She looked at her camera screen, her hands trembling, her pulse quickening. She knew what she had seen, but the proof the image was gone. It was the first time Lily truly felt the weight of the lake's mystery pressing against her, as though the water was hiding something from her, something she was meant to discover. And so she returned the next day, and the next. Each day, hoping to capture what had slipped through her fingers. The lake, as still as ever, seemed to mock her, offering glimpses of something she could never quite touch. Lily was caught in a cycle, now returning to the lake, not out of hope, but out of a compulsion she didn't understand. She felt drawn to it, pulled by something beyond her control. The lake was no longer just a mirror, it was a riddle, one that she couldn't ignore. And with each passing day, the air around the lake felt heavier, as though the past and present were colliding. And Lily was standing at the center of it all, waiting for the truth to reveal itself. But for now, all she had was the reflection, the horse, and the man, the mystery that refused to let her go. The night air was thick with the scent of pine, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the stillness of the lake. Lily stood at its edge, her camera dangling from her neck, but her fingers were still. She didn't know why she had come back tonight. Perhaps it was the beauty of the moonlight dancing on the water, or perhaps it was the quiet call that the lake had always held for her, pulling her in with an invisible force. She hadn't planned on taking another photo, not tonight. But something felt different. Something was waiting to be captured. Lily felt it deep in her bones, a tug in her chest that urged her to raise the camera to look through the lens and see what the night had to offer. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the unknown, the strange images that had flashed in her mind the past few days. The white horse, the figure in the water. Was it a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination? Her grip on reality was beginning to fray, and she hated it. But still the urge to snap the shutter was overwhelming. It was like a drug, a need she couldn't fight. Lily exhaled sharply and aimed the camera at the lake. The water was still, almost too still. It was as if the world had been paused, as if the lake itself was holding its breath, waiting. The surface of the water gleamed like glass, smooth and undisturbed, reflecting the moon's light like a perfect mirror. The surrounding trees stood tall in the distance, their dark silhouettes framed against the glow of the sky. As Lily peered through the viewfinder, her pulse quickened. There in the reflection, just at the edge of the water, she saw it. A shape. At first it was barely discernible, just a faint outline. But as she focused the lens, it grew clearer. A horse. A magnificent white horse, its coat glistening under the moonlight, standing still on the water's surface. The reflection was flawless, the image vivid and bright, as though it had been pulled from the very fabric of the night itself. The horse's mane billowed like smoke in the wind, its eyes wide and wild, as if sensing her gaze. Lily's breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the lens, trying to capture the moment. But even as the image of the horse sharpened, something felt wrong. She could see the ripples now, small, delicate waves that moved across the water as the horse slowly stepped forward, its hooves making soft, gentle impressions in the stillness. Her heart raced, her mind flooded with questions. What is this? How is this possible? The air felt heavier around her, like it was thick with something she couldn't name. The lake had always been strange, but this was something entirely different. A part of her screamed to drop the camera and run. But another part, the one that had always been drawn to the mystery, urged her to stay to capture this impossible moment. She clicked the shutter. The sound of the camera's snap echoed in the stillness of the night. But the image that appeared on the screen was empty. Blank. The horse was gone. The reflection had vanished. Only the calm, undisturbed water remained its surface as smooth as ever. There was no horse, no ripples, no sign of the vision she had just witnessed. Lily blinked, staring at the screen in disbelief. She checked the settings, adjusted the lens, tried again. Each time she snapped the photo, the result was the same, an empty frame, a barren reflection. The horse had disappeared as if it had never been there. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the disbelief settled in. Was she losing her mind? Could it be that she had imagined it? She felt a flicker of frustration, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't real. But the image, the one she had seen with her own eyes, was still vivid in her mind. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't her imagination. She had seen it. The night felt oppressive now, the silence wrapping around her like a heavy cloak. Lily turned from the lake, her legs unsteady beneath her. Her hands still trembled as she lowered the camera. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips and the hollow of her throat. Something was wrong. Something deep and ancient was waking up here, and she had no idea how to stop it. She walked back to her cabin that night, with the camera still slung over her shoulder. But the thought of sleep was distant. Her mind was a tangle of images, the white horse, the moonlit reflection, the emptiness that followed when she tried to capture it. She couldn't make sense of it. And yet there was something in her gut telling her that this was just the beginning. The lake had given her a glimpse, a brief moment of clarity, only to take it away in an instant. It was as if it was testing her, playing with her, pushing her to see something that she wasn't ready to see. Lily couldn't shake the feeling. She lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and doubt. She tried to convince herself that it was just the fatigue, the isolation getting to her. But deep down, she knew that wasn't it. She had seen the horse. She had heard the ripples in the water. She had felt the pull of something far more powerful than her own understanding. And as the night stretched on, Lily knew one thing for certain: she would return to the lake the next night. She couldn't explain why. She didn't know what she was searching for. But the lake had shown her a glimpse of something beyond the surface, something that called to her. She had to know what it was. The following nights were consumed by her obsession with the lake. Night after night, she returned each time, hoping to capture the same vision she had seen. But each time, the same emptiness greeted her. The water was always still, the surface untouched, as though mocking her attempts. Yet she couldn't stop. Lily's obsession grew a burning need to find an explanation, to find the truth. It was as if the lake had become a riddle she couldn't solve, a mystery she couldn't escape. And with each visit, Lily's doubts grew. But so did her determination. She couldn't let go of the image, of the white horse, of the figure it had dragged behind it. There was a story here, one that had yet to be told. A story that the lake was hiding, but one that was waiting for her to uncover. But Lily couldn't know, not yet, that the more she searched for answers, the more the lake would reveal. And with each new revelation, the line between reality and the supernatural would blur even further. It had been a week since Lily had first glimpsed the white horse on the lake. And with each passing night, the visions grew clearer. What had been a faint, ethereal image had become a vivid, undeniable reality. Night after night, she returned to the lake, each time driven by a relentless need to capture something she couldn't explain, something she couldn't quite touch. The horse, its ghostly white coat glowing under the moonlight, was always there now, its reflection steady and undisturbed by the ripples of the water. But as Lily's focus sharpened, so did the other figure in the reflection. At first it had been a shadow, a vague outline. But now she saw him clearly, his body, limp face, hidden in shadow, being dragged by the horse. Every night the figure grew more distinct. A man with the unmistakable signs of injury, his clothes torn, his body beaten and broken. He was not just being pulled by the horse. He was being dragged as if tethered to it by some invisible force, helpless and trapped in a loop of suffering. His face remained obscured in the reflection, but the agony he exuded was palpable. Lily could feel it in her chest as she watched her breath catching in her throat. There was a pain in that image, an overwhelming, unrelenting sorrow that pierced her like a needle. She could almost hear the man's muffled cries, feel the weight of his broken body, struggling to keep up with the steady pace of the horse. And the horse, its eyes wide and empty, its movements graceful, yet filled with an indescribable sadness, was no savior. It was no guide. It was a creature of sorrow carrying a burden it could never release. Lily's hands shook as she snapped more photos, each frame showing the man being dragged, but no matter how many pictures she took, No matter how many times she reviewed the images, there was never any trace of the man or the horse in the real world. The reflection, though, it remained. The more she looked, the more she understood this wasn't just a vision. This was a memory bound to the lake, to the land, to something long buried. And yet Lily couldn't shake the doubt. What am I seeing? Is this real? Am I losing my grip on reality? Her heart raced, torn between a deep visceral need to understand and a rising terror that the truth she sought might be more than she could bear. The pain, the suffering, it felt too raw, too real. Lily was no stranger to grief, but this was something else. This was more than just a passing shadow in her mind. This was something old, something tied to the land, to the history that was buried deep beneath the surface of the lake. Something she couldn't yet comprehend. The more Lily studied the images, the more the man's presence grew heavier. His injuries, his pain were becoming a weight on her own heart. It was as if his suffering was spilling out of the lake, seeping into her very soul, dragging her deeper into a story she had no business uncovering. And yet the pull was undeniable. She couldn't stop. Each night she found herself standing by the shore, camera in hand, waiting for the reflection to appear. The conflict within her was growing unbearable. What if I'm seeing something I shouldn't? The very thought of the man, his silent agony, was eating at her. Her heart ached for him, but part of her was terrified of what it meant. The more she tried to understand, the more she felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. The world around her was becoming a blur, the boundaries between reality and the supernatural warping, blending into a dark and twisted space. Lily knew that this was not just about the lake anymore. It wasn't just about the reflection of the horse. There was something deeper at play here, something ancient, something that had been waiting for someone to see it. And now that Lily had seen it, there was no turning back. She tried to convince herself that it was all just her mind playing tricks, that the long hours of isolation and the weight of her grief were making her see things that weren't really there. But every time she looked at the lake, every time she reviewed the photographs, the truth was staring her in the face. The man, the one who was being dragged by the horse, was not just any figure. He was a symbol of pain, of sacrifice, of war. The figure was tethered to something that had been lost long ago, something the land itself had absorbed. And the horse, the white horse, was not just a creature of legend. It was part of that story. It was the carrier of suffering bound to the man who had been lost in a battle that had never truly ended. The war was still being fought in the reflection on the lake, in the space between the living and the dead. Each time she returned to the lake, each time she looked through the lens, the figure grew more distinct, more defined. The pain in his eyes, the way his body twisted in agony, was becoming clearer. She could almost feel his desperation, the way he reached out with invisible hands begging for release. He wasn't just a part of the lake's history. He was a part of her history now. His suffering had become hers, whether she wanted it or not. The image haunted her, but it also captivated her. Lily could not tear herself away from the lake. She was trapped in a cycle, returning each night, her camera in hand, hoping for something more, hoping for an answer that she knew deep down she wasn't prepared for. But the question gnawed at her relentlessly. What was she supposed to do with the knowledge that had been thrust upon her? How could she make sense of the man's pain, and most terrifying of all, what if finding the truth meant facing a darkness that she wasn't strong enough to handle? The lines between right and wrong, between what she should or shouldn't know, were blurring with each passing day. The lake, the reflection, the horse. Everything was pulling her deeper into a truth that could break her. But Lily couldn't stop. She couldn't let go. There was something in the reflection that demanded to be seen, a story that needed to be told, and though she felt herself slipping further and further into this dark abyss, she knew she could never walk away from it. The truth was calling, and no matter how terrified she was, she had to answer. The battle within her raged on, torn between the pull of the lake, the horror of the reflection, and the responsibility to uncover a past that could destroy her. The horse, the man. The pain, they were all intertwined, and they had found her, dragged her into their story. And now, there was no turning back. The old man's house was tucked away in the heart of the small village, a modest cabin that seemed to breathe with the weight of history. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and herbs, and Lily stood hesitantly at the threshold, clutching the photos tightly in her hands. She hadn't planned on this moment, hadn't intended to bring the past crashing back to life. But something in her told her that she had no choice. The answers she had been searching for were just beyond this door. The elder, known only as Eamon, had lived here all his life. He was one of the last elders who held the stories of their people, of the old ways, the forgotten battles, the history of war that had shaped their lives. Lily knew he was a man of deep wisdom, but he was also a man of secrets. Secrets she wasn't sure she was ready to face. As she stepped inside, the firelight flickered in the corner, casting long shadows against the wooden walls. The elder was seated by the hearth, his face lined with age, his hands steady as he carved something small and intricate out of a piece of wood. When he looked up at her, his eyes were sharp, though his body was frail. He had seen much in his time, but there was something about Lily that seemed to unsettle him. "Come in, child," he said in a voice roughened by years of smoke and stories. "I've been waiting for you." Lily hesitated, but then she moved toward him, the photographs heavy in her grip. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. Eamon's gaze never wavered as he studied her silently. She felt exposed, as though he could see straight through her. Finally, with a deep breath, she spoke. I found something," she said quietly. "I think it's important." With that, she laid the photos down on the table before him, one by one. The images were haunting. The white horse, the man being dragged across the water, it was all there. She watched as Eamon's eyes moved over the photos, his expression growing more intense with each passing moment. His hands trembled as they hovered over the final image, the one that had haunted her the most. Lily's voice wavered as she asked, "Do you recognize him?" The man in the water. For a moment, there was silence, and Lily's heart skipped a beat. Eamon's eyes widened ever so slightly, his lips pressing together in a tight line. Then, with a deep breath, he spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "That's my father," he said. And for the first time, Lily saw his eyes fill with something she hadn't expected. Something that was not just shock, but deep sorrow, like the weight of a lifetime of unspoken grief. He disappeared in 1944. I was just a boy then. He went off to war and never came back. We never knew what happened to him. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. The words hit her like a freight train. But even as they did, she realized something profound. This wasn't just a ghost story. This wasn't some eerie reflection in a lake. This was real. This man, this soldier, had been lost to history, his fate unknown, his story left unfinished. And now, Lily had become the bearer of that story. Her mind spun. How could this be? She had thought the lake was just a place for quiet reflection, a landscape of peace. But now she was staring into the dark heart of history itself, into a tragedy that had never truly ended. The images she had captured weren't just of some lost soul. They were the echoes of a life, a family, a legacy left behind in the wake of war. Lily felt a deep, aching sorrow settle into her chest as she looked at the elder. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't known what she had been looking for. But now that she had found it, it was more than she could bear. The weight of the truth was crushing. The man in the photo was not just a nameless soldier. He was Eamon's father, a man whose disappearance had shaped the entire community. And now his spirit seemed to be reaching out to find closure. The fire crackled in the silence between them, and Lily realized that she had become part of a story much larger than herself. She had been drawn into this mystery, this tragedy, and now there was no escaping it. Eamon's pain was her pain. His loss, her loss. Eamon's voice broke the stillness. He was a good man, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. A soldier who fought for something he believed in. But that belief, it cost him everything. He never came home, and we never knew why. The war, it stole so much from us, from our people. And it left us with nothing but these stories, these broken memories. Lily swallowed hard, her throat tight. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected this. She had thought, perhaps, that the truth would bring peace, bring understanding. But now she realized how much pain was embedded in the past. The story of this family of Eamon's father was not just a story of war. It was a story of loss of something that had never been allowed to heal. It was a wound festering beneath the surface of the lake, waiting to be acknowledged. Eamon's gaze shifted to the photos on the table, and for a moment there was a flicker of something deep in his eyes. He reached out his hands, shaking slightly as he touched the photo of the man his father dragged by the white horse. His fingers lingered on the image, as if he were trying to reach across the years, trying to connect with the father he had never truly known. Lily watched him in silence, the weight of the moment sinking deeper into her bones. She had come here searching for answers, but now she saw that the answers were far more complex than she could have imagined. The man in the photo, the one whose suffering had become a part of her own, was not just a lost soldier. He was a father, a husband, a son, someone who had been ripped from his family, lost to the horrors of war and forgotten by time. As the firelight danced in the room, Lily felt the layers of history closing in around her. She had come seeking understanding, but now she found herself drowning in it. This was not just a search for truth. It was a confrontation with the past. A past that could not be ignored, a past that demanded to be seen. The conflict in Lily's heart was palpable. She had learned something she wasn't sure she was ready for. She had opened a door to a history of pain, and now she didn't know if she had the strength to walk through it. She could feel herself pulled in two directions, one toward the truth, toward closure for this lost soul, and the other terrified of what the truth might bring. The images, the man, the horse, they had become a part of her life now. But was she prepared to carry the weight of that history? Was she ready to confront the ghosts that had been lying dormant for so long? Eamon's voice broke through her thoughts. The lake, he said quietly, his voice steady, has always been a place of healing, but it can also be a place of reckoning. What you have seen, what you've captured, it's not just a story for us. It's a story that needs to be told. It needs to be known. My father's spirit, it has been wandering for too long. It's time to give him peace. Lily's heart twisted. The elder was right. This wasn't just her story anymore. It was theirs, his, hers, the entire community's. And now it was up to her to decide what to do with it. The nights had begun to blur together for Lily. The dreams, though, were becoming more vivid. They were no longer fleeting images in the dark corners of her mind, easily dismissed as the result of fatigue or too much isolation. No, these dreams were different, alive, urgent, and impossible to ignore. It started one night, when the moon hung low in the sky, its light casting a cold, silver sheen over the lake. Lily had stayed up late again, staring out the cabin window at the water, trying to make sense of the images. She had seen the man, the white horse, the torment that echoed from the depths of the lake. She had felt the weight of the elder's words pressing down on her heart, the understanding that what she had uncovered was only the beginning of a much larger story. That night she dreamt of the lake. But it wasn't like the lake she knew, calm and still beneath the moonlight. In the dream, the water was dark, churning alive with something restless. She stood at its edge, her feet sinking into the muddy earth, as a voice, a whisper, a command spoke from the depths of the water. "Dive," the voice said. "Find the truth." Lily froze, staring into the black water. It wasn't just a dream. She could feel it, this strange pull, this force urging her to dive in, to surrender to the darkness, and uncover what had been buried there for so long. But the deeper she stared into the water, the more she could sense the weight of something dark waiting beneath the surface. The voice, though soft, echoed in her mind, growing louder with every beat of her heart. "Dive," it repeated. "Only then will you understand." The pull was irresistible. Her breath quickened as she stepped forward, the cold mud seeping into her shoes, the ground shifting beneath her, as if the earth itself was trying to stop her. But she didn't stop. Her legs moved as if they had a mind of their own, carrying her closer to the water, closer to whatever it was that waited there. Lily's heart pounded in her chest, her mind screaming for her to turn back. But the voice was so clear, so insistent, urging her to surrender to the darkness. "Find the truth." The words echoed in her head, reverberating through her entire being. She stepped into the water. The cold shocked her as it wrapped around her ankles, sending a shiver up her spine. She waded deeper, the water rising around her waist, her breath becoming ragged, her heart hammering in her chest. She could see nothing beneath the surface, only the inky blackness. Yet the deeper she went, the more she felt it. Something ancient, something heavy, something that had been waiting. The voice, now louder than ever, urged her forward. "It's here," it whispered. "The truth is here in the depths. You must dive." And so, with no more hesitation, Lily plunged beneath the water. The cold was suffocating the darkness, pressing in on all sides. She kicked her legs, her arms cutting through the water, but she could see nothing. The surface was far above her now, just a distant memory. And yet she kept sinking, pulled down by something she couldn't understand. Something that felt both comforting and terrifying. And then in the deep, dark abyss, she saw it. A faint glow, a flicker of light. It was coming from something, someone beneath the water. Her eyes widened as the light grew brighter, clearer, until she could make out the shape. It was the man. His body was floating there, suspended in the water. His eyes closed, his face pale. He was not dead, though. No, he was something more. He was trapped, his soul tethered to the depths of the lake, his body bound to the land in a way that was not natural. Lily's hand reached out toward him, and as her fingers brushed his face, the water around her seemed to pulse with energy. The moment her skin touched his, the water rushed in, pulling her deeper faster, as though something inside her was unlocking a door to the past, a connection to the memories that had been buried here for so long. The world shifted. Lily felt herself pulled through time, through layers of memories, his memories, her memories. She saw flashes of a time long ago, a battlefield, blood and chaos. She saw him, the man, his face young, filled with life before he was dragged into the war. She saw him as a soldier, fighting not for honor, but for survival. She saw him as a son, a brother, a man who had dreams of returning home, dreams that had been ripped away by the horrors of war. The images swirled around her, crashing through her mind like a storm. She saw his family, Eamon's family, standing on the shore, waiting for a man who would never return. She saw the pain, the heartbreak, the questions that had never been answered. The man in the water wasn't just a victim of war. He was a man whose life had been torn apart by forces beyond his control, and whose spirit had been trapped by the lake, unable to find peace. As Lily's mind swirled with the images, the water began to close in around her, pulling her down, drowning her in the weight of it all. She gasped for air, her lungs burning, her heart pounding in her chest. The truth was suffocating. The deeper she went, the more she realized the lake was not just a place of reflection. It was a grave for souls who had been lost, never to find peace. But in the distance, she saw the light again, brighter now. The voice spoke once more, clearer than ever. You must dive deeper. Only then will you understand. Her mind screamed in terror, but her body, still tethered to the lake, felt no fear. It only felt the pull, an urge to dive deeper, to find what had been buried, to understand what had been lost. She had to face it. She had to confront it. She had to see it all. But in that moment, as the water closed around her, something shifted. The grip of the lake loosened. The weight of the past, the pain, the suffering, everything began to dissipate. And Lily understood. This was not just about the man, not just about the past. This was about her. This was about her own history, her own pain, the wounds that she had buried deep inside. The lake, the water, the man, they were not separate from her. They were a reflection of her own struggle, her own fight to heal, to move forward. And with that realization, the darkness that had once felt suffocating began to recede. The lake, though still dark and mysterious, no longer held the same power over her. She had unlocked the truth not just of the man, but of herself. She had seen the suffering, the grief, the ghosts of the past. And now, she could move forward. The dream faded, and Lily woke with a start, her heart still racing, her body trembling. The images of the lake, the man and the voice still lingered in her mind. But now something had changed. She was no longer running from the past. She was facing it, ready to confront whatever it was that had been holding her back. The lake had given her the key. Now it was up to her to use it. The night was colder than Lily had anticipated. The chill in the air seeped through her jacket, wrapping around her like a cold promise. She stood at the edge of the lake once again, this time with determination in her heart, her mind made up. Tonight she would answer the question that had haunted her for weeks. What lay beneath the water? The dream had left a mark on her, a heavy lingering feeling that told her she had no choice but to follow the whispering voice, the call to dive. She had seen the truth, felt its weight in the dream, but now she had to face it for herself. The lake had been waiting for her just as it had waited for so many before her. It was time to uncover what was buried, to pull from its depths the truth that had been lost in time. Lily's heart raced as she waded into the cold water, the ripples spreading out beneath her feet. She had been here before, stood at this very spot, but this time was different. She felt the pull, an invisible current tugging at her like a magnetic force. The weight of the moment hung over her, but she stepped forward anyway, her breath steady despite the turmoil inside. She had no idea what she would find. The darkness of the lake, its depths unknown, held so many mysteries, so many untold stories. But the voice in her dream had been clear: dive. And so she did. Lily sank into the water, the chill enveloping her body like a second skin. The deeper she went, the darker it became. The surface above her disappeared, leaving her in a world of nothing but silence and weight. The water pressed against her like a thick blanket, wrapping her in its cold embrace. She kicked her legs, her body gliding deeper, her hands reaching out to guide her. It was then that she saw it a faint glimmer in the distance, barely visible in the murk. At first she thought it was just a trick of the light, a reflection of the moon above. But as she swam closer, the glimmer became clearer. It was something solid, something real. Lily's pulse quickened, and her hands shook as she reached out toward it. Her fingers brushed against something hard metal. She pulled it up, her heart racing as she brought it into the dim light of the water. It was a piece of metal, old and tarnished, but unmistakable. It was a medal. A military medal worn with age, its edges dented and frayed. It was just a piece of metal to anyone else, but to Lily, it was the key. She gripped it tightly, her breath quickening as she inspected it. It wasn't just any medal. This was a piece of the past, a fragment of a life that had been lost, a life that had been torn apart by the very war that had shaped the elder's life. This was the story of the man she had seen in the reflection, the man who had been dragged by the white horse. As Lily stared at this medal, she felt something else, a piece of paper brittle with age, wedged between the metal and the muck of the lake bed. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it, her hands unsteady with the weight of what she might find. The water around her seemed to still as she read the faded handwriting. "If I do not return, please let the horse carry me the rest of the way." The words were simple, yet they were profound. They were a plea, a final wish. Lily felt the weight of them settle in her chest as she read them over and over, each repetition sinking deeper into her soul. This was it. This was the truth she had been searching for. The man the soldier had known, he wouldn't return. He had known that the war would take him, and he had asked for one final thing, a peaceful end, a ride with the horse to carry him through the final stretch. Her heart ached as she clutched the medal and the letter, her hands shaking. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the knowledge that she was holding a piece of something so much larger than herself. The soldier's words weren't just a message, they were a cry for peace, a plea that had been lost in the chaos of war. And now the lake had answered. For a moment, Lily could only float in the water, suspended in time. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The medal, the letter. It was all too much. She had come seeking answers, but now that she had them, they felt overwhelming, suffocating. The truth was not what she had expected. It wasn't just about the man or the war. It was about the stories we leave behind, the pieces of ourselves that linger long after we are gone. The image of the white horse flashed in her mind. The horse that had appeared in her photos, the one that had pulled the man through the water. She understood now. The horse wasn't just a symbol of the past. It was the vehicle of release, of closure, the means by which the soul could move on. The man had asked for it in his final moments, and now it was up to her to carry out his wish, to free him. But as she hovered in the water, Lily felt something else. The past wasn't just a memory. It was a living, breathing entity, a force that was pulling her under, forcing her to confront the pieces of her own past that she had buried deep within. She had come here to find the truth about the man, but in doing so, she had also unearthed the truth about herself. The conflict inside her grew. She had uncovered the past, but at what cost? The weight of the soldier's plea, the weight of the lake's history. It all pressed down on her, and Lily felt herself drowning not in the water, but in the truth. The past had a way of finding you, of calling to you when you least expected it. And now Lily knew that there was no escaping it. The past, like the lake, had a way of drawing you in, of holding you captive until you faced it head on. Her hands still shaking, Lily clutched the medal and the letter tightly to her chest. She could feel the pulse of history in her fingertips, the heartbeat of a man who had long since passed, but whose story would never be forgotten. The lake had given her the key, but it had also given her a burden that she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. With one last glance at the water, Lily turned and swam back to the surface, the cold air biting at her skin as she broke free from the depths. She emerged from the lake gasping for breath, her chest heaving with the weight of what she had uncovered. The truth had been found, but it was only the beginning. The real question now was what she would do with it. What would she do with the past that had found her, that had dragged her into its depths? As the night sky stretched above her, Lily held the medal in her hand, the weight of the past still heavy in her heart. She had uncovered the truth. But the journey, she realized, was far from over. The moon was low again, casting its pale light across the dark expanse of the lake. This time, Lily felt its presence differently, more like an old friend, a guide than an oppressive weight. The events of the past few weeks, the photographs, the visions, the truth she had uncovered, had brought her to this point. It was as if the pieces of the puzzle, scattered and unclear before, had finally begun to fall into place. But they hadn't fallen in the way she had imagined. They hadn't been the answers she had expected. And yet they were more than that. Lily stood by the edge of the lake, the cool night air wrapping around her like a blanket. In her hand she held the medal, the symbol of the man lost to time, to war, to the suffering that had been passed down through generations. In the other, the letter, a final wish that had echoed across decades, a desperate plea for release. She didn't know how to do it, didn't know if she was even the one meant to fulfill it. But the ceremony, the ritual had been clear. She had heard it in the voice of the elder. The ancient words that had been passed down through the Métis people, the stories of the horse of sacrifice and of the healing that could come from honoring the past. Tonight, she would perform the ceremony, the horse ceremony. A ritual that had always been a part of their culture, a way to bring peace to wandering spirits. Lily wasn't sure what she was about to do. She had never been a spiritual person, never fully embraced the customs of the Métis people. But now, with the weight of the past pressing down on her, with the past staring her in the face, she felt as though she had no choice but to follow through. It was more than just the man in the lake. It was more than the white horse that had been her guide through this strange journey. It was about healing, about letting go, about finding peace in the face of trauma. As she stood there staring at the still water, she could hear the whispers of the wind through the trees, the ancient call of something beyond the visible world. The voice, the one that had guided her through the depths of the lake, was still there, faint, like a memory, but real. She felt its pull once more. Lily placed the medal and the letter on a small altar she had constructed, the symbols of the past laid out carefully beneath the moonlight. A bundle of sage wrapped in twine burned slowly beside it, its smoke curling upward into the night sky, carrying with it the prayers, the hopes, the fears of those who had come before her. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows on her features, as if she were caught between two worlds. The world she knew, and the one that had been hidden from her all along. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding. The horse, the figure she had seen in the water, was no longer just a creature in a photograph. It was a symbol, an embodiment of freedom, of release. It was the link between the living and the dead, the one that could carry the spirit of the lost soldier across the threshold of time into the peace it had been denied for so long. The wind picked up, and the sound of hooves seemed to echo through the trees, faint at first, but growing louder closer. Lily's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing. It was the horse, she was sure of it. She felt its presence strong, like an old companion returning after a long absence. The image of the horse she had seen in the water filled her mind, its wild, untamed spirit calling to her, now urging her to continue. It was time. The ceremony had begun. Lily stepped into the shallow water, the cold biting at her skin. She had no words to offer, no formal prayers or chants to speak. But what she had was her respect, her acknowledgement of the history that had shaped her, of the pain that had brought her to this moment. She raised her arms, palms open to the sky, and closed her eyes. In the stillness of the night, the world seemed to pause, and then she spoke. "I honor you," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper against the wind. "I honor the sacrifice. I honor the lost souls, the ones who never came home. I honor the ones who carry their pain, their stories across time." She paused, her eyes still closed, her arms still raised. The wind shifted the air, thick with the scent of sage and the weight of the past. She could feel it, something shifting in the air, a quiet power growing around her. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was real. The lake was more than just a body of water. It was a keeper of memories, a vessel for the souls of those who had passed a place where the past lingered, waiting for release. She stepped deeper into the water, the cold seeping into her bones, but she didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid. She wasn't just doing this for the soldier, for the man who had been lost in the war. She was doing it for herself, for the pain she had carried for so long, for the wounds she had never allowed herself to heal. The horse was her guide, not just through the past, but through the process of letting go, of finding peace. And as the water rose to her waist, she felt something begin to change. The tension in her chest eased, the tightness in her heart loosening, as if the weight of everything, the secrets, the grief, the confusion, was slowly being washed away. It wasn't gone, not yet, but it was being released. Piece by piece, layer by layer, she could feel it lifting. The horse's spirit was with her, guiding her, urging her to continue. The ceremony wasn't just about honoring the past. It was about accepting it, about finding closure, about letting go of the things that had been holding her back. When she finally stepped back from the water, the ceremony complete, Lily felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She looked out across the lake, the stillness of the water reflecting the moon and the stars, and for the first time in a long time, she felt connected not just to the land, but to the people who had walked it before her, to the stories that had been passed down to the spirits that had been waiting for release. The horse, the man, the lake, they were no longer just symbols. They were part of her now, part of her journey, part of the healing she had been seeking. As she stood there, the firelight flickering behind her, Lily knew that she had done what she could. The past had been honored. The healing had begun. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, peace. The days following the ceremony passed in a strange haze, each one more quiet than the last. Lily had expected a release, a sudden feeling of closure. But instead, the world felt suspended, as if the weight of the past still clung to her in unseen ways. The lake remained calm, its surface glimmering in the early morning light. But something had shifted. She could feel it, like the shift of the earth beneath her feet, like the pull of gravity changing direction. Each day she awoke with a strange sense of anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. It was the mornings that were hardest. The cold air, the mist that rose from the water. The silence, everything seemed to echo with the weight of what had happened, of what had been released, of what had been given peace. But there was still a lingering ache, a reminder that not all of the pain could be erased. Not all of the wounds could be healed. Not all of the ghosts could be laid to rest. Lily stood on the shore again, the early morning light painting the water in soft hues of pink and gold. She watched as the mist rose from the lake, curling in delicate tendrils before vanishing into the cool morning air. It was beautiful, tranquil, and yet there was something about it that felt incomplete. The sound of her breath, steady and rhythmic, was the only thing that broke the stillness. Then, as if it had been waiting for her, it appeared. A single set of hoof prints. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a shift in the mist, but no. As the fog began to lift, and the first rays of the sun touched the water, Lily saw them, distinct, clear, long hoof prints stretching from the far edge of the lake, trailing across the shore, fading into the distance. They were fresh wet, like they had been left only moments before. Her heart stopped for a beat, and then began to race. She stepped closer to the water, drawn to the marks in the sand, the imprint of the hooves so clear, so real, that it was impossible to deny. The prints stretched for hundreds of meters, leading from one side of the lake to the other. And then, as if they had never existed at all, they disappeared into the water, vanishing without a trace. Lily knelt by the edge of the lake, her fingers brushing the wet sand where the hoofprints had been. The sensation was electric, as though she were touching something far older than herself. Something that had been waiting for centuries to be acknowledged. There was no explanation for it. There was no way to understand it. But in that moment, she didn't need to understand. It was enough to know that the horse had returned. It had left its mark. It had come back to complete its journey, just as the man had asked. And though the photo that had once captured the horse's reflection was empty, now the tracks in the sand told a different story. They were a message. A sign that the past had not been lost. That the connection between what had been and what was still existed. The symbol of the horse, of the sacrifice of the past that had been laid to rest, it was still with her. She had honored the soldier's final wish, had given peace to his spirit. And now the world was acknowledging it in the most extraordinary way. The marks in the sand were more than just footprints. They were the evidence of something larger than herself. Something that transcended time, transcended pain. Lily sat by the water for a long time, watching as the sun rose higher, casting a golden glow across the lake. Her fingers tightened around the medal still in her hand from the ceremony. The horse's tracks were fading slowly, erasing themselves in the water's edge. But their significance remained. She felt the pull of the past lifting, releasing its grip on her heart as if the very land, the very water was breathing with her. The ache in her chest, the remnants of the grief she had carried for so long, seemed to soften like the footprints in the sand being smoothed by the water. The soldier, the horse, the history, they were all part of her, now part of the healing she had not known she needed. She hadn't just given peace to the past, she had found peace for herself. As the days went on, Lily continued to visit the lake each morning, standing by the water's edge, waiting for the signs that had become a part of her life. The prints, however, did not appear again. The lake was still its surface smooth as glass, but the silence was no longer oppressive. It was calm, filled with a quiet sense of understanding. Every morning the mist rose, and every morning Lily waited. She waited for the footprints to reappear. She didn't know if they ever would. But in her heart, she knew something had changed. The past had been honored, the journey had been completed, and the ghosts that had haunted her for so long were no longer bound to the lake. They were free. But more than that, she was free. The conflict that had torn at her heart between the need to understand the past and the need to let it go had resolved itself. The footprints, the horse, the man, they had connected the present to the past, linking the two in a way that no amount of understanding could have. It wasn't about finding logical answers or explanations. It was about feeling the truth, embracing the unknown, and finding solace in the things that couldn't be explained. Lily stood one last time at the edge of the lake, the sun now fully risen, casting its light across the water. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth soak into her skin, and breathed deeply. She felt lighter now, as though the burden of the past had been lifted from her shoulders. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it no longer controlled her. The journey had ended. The peace had come. And with that, she turned away from the water. The prints no longer visible, but the connection still present, still lingering in the air. She had done what she had come to do. The past had been honored, and now she could move forward. The footprints were gone. But the memory of them, the memory of the horse, of the man, of the healing, would remain with her always. The morning after the footprints had first appeared on the lake, Lily went about her day with a quiet sense of accomplishment, her thoughts lingering on the image of the tracks fading into the mist. She hadn't spoken of it to anyone yet, not really. But the events of the past days felt like they were still echoing through her mind, urging her to do something more. She wasn't sure what that something was, but she knew she couldn't keep this experience to herself. It was too big, too significant. It was then that she noticed the old woman, Mrs. Gladys, standing by the side of the lake, staring out at the water. Mrs. Gladys was a quiet figure in the community, always seen with her white shawl and worn boots, a living relic of the past. She rarely spoke, but when she did, people listened. She was a woman who had lived through many of the hardships the community had endured, and her wisdom carried the weight of those years. Lily approached her cautiously, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to seem presumptuous, but something inside her pushed her forward. Mrs. Gladys turned slowly, as if she had been waiting for Lily all along. "Ah, Lily," Mrs. Gladys said, her voice soft but steady. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Lily's heart skipped a beat. How did she know she had barely spoken of it to anyone? "The horse's tracks," Mrs. Gladys continued. "The ones that appear each morning at dawn. I've seen them too. For many days now, the tracks appear stretching from one side of the lake to the other. They come and go, but they always leave something behind." Lily was stunned. She hadn't spoken of the footprints, hadn't even mentioned what had happened during her morning rituals by the lake. But Mrs. Gladys knew. She knew exactly what Lily had seen. "It's not just a dream, is it?" Mrs. Gladys asked, her eyes searching Lily's face for confirmation. "The man, the soldier, the horse, the lake. It's more than just water. It's a place where memories live. It's a place where the past can speak to us if we listen." Lily swallowed hard, the weight of the truth sitting heavily on her chest. She nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what to say. There was a strange comfort in hearing Mrs. Gladys speak these words aloud, as if the very act of acknowledging it made it real, made it something that could be shared. "People forget," Mrs. Gladys continued, her voice now softer, tinged with a sadness that only those who had lived through loss could carry. "People forget the stories, the soldiers, the ones who didn't come back. But the land remembers, the lake remembers, and it's been trying to tell us all along." Lily's mind raced as the words sank in. She had been so focused on her own journey, her own healing, that she hadn't stopped to think about the impact this would have on the community. The footprints were more than just a symbol of the past. It was a message to everyone who had been touched by the war, by the suffering, by the stories that had never been told. The next morning, Lily returned to the lake, as she had every morning since the ceremony. She stood there, the mist swirling around her. But today, it felt different. Today there was a sense of quiet anticipation, as if the very air was waiting for something. And then it appeared again, the horse's footprints clear and deep in the sand. But this time Lily wasn't alone. Mrs. Gladys was there, standing beside her, watching the tracks form and disappear with each passing moment. "I told the others," Mrs. Gladys said quietly, her eyes still fixed on the tracks. "I told them about the horse. about the soldiers, about the pain we've all carried for so long. They've come. They've come to listen. Lily's heart quickened. She turned to look back at the small gathering of people emerging from the trees. Neighbors, friends, relatives, all of them drawn to the lake, to the footprints, to the story that was unfolding before them. At first there was silence. The people stood in awe, some with tears in their eyes, others with a quiet reverence. They had heard the stories, but they had never seen the signs. The lake had always been there, but now it held something more, a living connection to the past, a bridge between the loss and the healing. "I thought it was just me," one of the older men whispered. "I thought it was just a dream. But now I see. I see that we're all connected to this, all of us." Lily felt a deep warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't the only one who had felt the weight of the past, who had seen the suffering reflected in the water. They all had. And now they all had the chance to face it together. The pain, the grief, it wasn't something that had to be carried alone anymore. It was something they could share, something they could heal together. As the community gathered by the shore, each person standing quietly, their eyes fixed on the disappearing tracks, Lily felt the power of their collective presence. They weren't just acknowledging the past, they were honoring it. They were standing together, not just as individuals, but as a community, bound by the same history, the same loss. The footprints in the sand were no longer just the marks of a past that could never be undone. They were a symbol of connection, a bridge between the living and the dead, between the past and the present. They were a reminder that the stories of those who had suffered were not forgotten, that the pain could be shared, and that healing was possible. The air around the lake seemed to shift the tension that had once gripped Lily's heart, beginning to fade. There was no more fear, no more doubt. The past had been acknowledged, but it had not been allowed to define them. The community was no longer carrying the weight alone. They had come together bound by their shared history, their shared pain, and their shared hope. As the last of the footprints disappeared into the water, Lily stood with the others, her heart full, her soul light. The lake, the horse, the footprints, they had brought them together. They had given them a chance to heal. And for the first time, Lily knew that the past had not been in vain. It had led them to this moment, to this connection, to this understanding. Together they had found peace. Lily stood at the edge of the lake once again, her breath steady but deep as the weight of the past seemed to settle around her. The lake had always been a place of stillness, of quiet reflection. But now it felt like a place of understanding, of finality. The water, calm and smooth beneath the pale light of the early morning, mirrored her own emotions still, but no longer burdened by the unknown, the uncertainty that had gripped her for so long. The man's spirit, the soldier who had been lost to history, had finally found peace. The white horse, the one that had appeared in the water, had led him to that peace, as had the ceremony she had performed. It wasn't just about honoring the past, it was about healing for herself and for everyone who had been touched by the ghosts of war. As the days had passed, Lily had returned to the lake every morning waiting. Waiting for something, though she wasn't sure what. She had known from the start that the answers she sought would not be easily given. But now standing here, the stillness of the water no longer felt like a void. It felt like freedom. The man's journey had been completed, and with it the lingering specter of his suffering had been released. The tracks no longer appeared on the water's surface. The ghostly presence of the horse no longer visited her dreams. At first, there had been a sense of loss when the horse's prints ceased to appear each morning. The ritual, the sign, had been comforting in a strange way, a reminder that the journey was ongoing. But now without them, Lily realized that this was not an end. It was a beginning. The absence of the horse meant that everything had been freed: the man, the memory, the suffering that had hung over the community for decades. The lake was no longer a place of mourning. It had become a place of peace. The absence of the footprints, the absence of the haunting presence, was proof that the spirits had been released. The past, though never forgotten, had been healed. And that was the most important part. The healing didn't just belong to Lily anymore. It had become a collective experience, a shared journey that had united the community. The elders, the families who had carried their own scars from the past, they had all been touched by the lake, by the footprints, by the horse's journey. And now, they too had found a place to begin anew. Lily felt the first real wave of peace wash over her. She had found the answers she sought. But more importantly, she had found the strength to let go. The pain that had once seemed inescapable, the sorrow that had once clung to her like a shadow, was lifting. It wasn't that the pain was gone, but it no longer defined her. She had learned to accept it, to live with it, to heal from it. But the healing didn't end with her. As the days turned to weeks, Lily noticed something shifting within the community. People who had once kept to themselves, who had buried their own grief, now began to open up. They shared their stories, their memories of the past, of the loved ones they had lost, of the trauma they had carried for years. It was as if the lake had unlocked something inside them too. They had seen the signs, the footprints, the horse's presence, and now they could no longer ignore the truth that had been hidden beneath the surface of their lives. The community began to come together, not just in mourning, but in celebration of what had been found, the connection that they all shared, the understanding that no one was truly alone in their suffering. Each person had their own story to tell, their own wounds to heal, but together they formed a collective bond. The lake had brought them together. The spirits of the past had connected them, and now they could heal together as one. 70-01-77 Nuzru. The true freedom. As the weeks passed, Lily found herself more and more involved with the community. She had always been a solitary person, a quiet observer of the world around her. But now she found herself drawn into the collective healing process. She listened to their stories, their grief, their pain, and in return, she shared her own. She no longer kept her emotions locked inside. The lake, the ceremony, the spirits of the past, they had unlocked something in her too. Something that had been buried deep within, waiting for the right moment to be set free. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Lily found herself by the lake once again. The community was gathered nearby, the sound of their laughter drifting over to her. They had just finished a ceremony of their own, a tribute to the soldiers who had fought and fallen to the ones who had never made it home. The air was filled with a quiet sense of camaraderie, of understanding. They had all shared their pain, and now they were sharing their healing. Lily stood at the water's edge, watching the lake as it shimmered in the fading light. The surface was still as it had been for days now. There were no more footprints, no more signs of the horse. But she wasn't disappointed. She didn't need the signs anymore. The healing had already begun both within her and within the community. The sound of footsteps behind her made her turn. Mrs. Gladys was standing there, a soft smile on her face, her hands clasped in front of her. The old woman had become a quiet guide to Lily, offering her wisdom and support as she navigated the complexities of the past and the future. "It's done, isn't it?" Mrs. Gladys said quietly, her eyes fixed on the lake. "The healing. The past has been laid to rest." Lily nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "It's done," she whispered, "and it's just the beginning." Mrs. Gladys smiled and placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "The lake has given us a gift, child. Not just the past, but the future. We are all part of this story now. We are all connected." Lily looked out across the water, the sense of peace filling her chest. The lake, the horse, the soldier. Everything that had brought her to this point had connected her to something larger than herself. The pain, the loss, the grief, it was all a part of the story. But now it was a story of healing, of hope. "I never thought it would end like this," Lily said softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything that had led her here. "I never thought I could let go." Mrs. Gladys nodded. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means allowing the past to guide us, to teach us, but not to control us. You've done the hard part, child. You've faced it. Now we can move forward." And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt the truth of those words. She had faced it. The past, the pain, the ghosts, they no longer held power over her. She had found a way to release it, to heal from it. And in doing so, she had brought healing to the community. The lake had been the catalyst, but the real work, the real healing had come from within. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and orange, Lily joined the others by the fire. They sat together talking, laughing, sharing stories of their lives, their struggles, and their hopes. They were no longer bound by their grief, no longer trapped in the past. They had moved forward together. And as Lily sat there, surrounded by the people who had become her family, she realized that the true freedom came not from escaping the past, but from embracing it, learning from it, and allowing it to shape who they were becoming. The lake, the horse, the ceremony, they had all played their part. But the real gift was the connection, the understanding that no one was ever truly alone, that together they could heal. Together they could move forward. And for the first time, Lily knew that the journey had been worth it.